Greetings all, this is Rick Levine with your September mid-month update. Actually, this is going to be more of a Pisces full moon report, and I'll take us up to the end of the month. But as many of you know, these are unusual circumstances for me because I am on the road. I am traveling by car from Seattle to New York for the weekend conference this weekend at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. And so I'm recording this from a hotel room somewhere. And I'm going to make this particular one public. It's going to be a little bit shorter than normal, but feel free to share this. Also, on my way cross country, I stopped in Denver for a few hours and recorded a special podcast for with Chris Brennan for Chris Brennan's The Astrology Podcast. And if you don't know about that, go to YouTube, where you already may be, and go to The Astrology Podcast. Chris and I recorded a special on the planet Uranus, and 30 seconds into it, we had a power outage. The link to that little fiasco of that short power outage and the kind of astrologically perfect craziness that ensued, the link will be down below in the description. Feel free to follow that. And the full podcast will be up later. That's in editing right now. But I do want to spend some time with you talking about the full moon. I'm recording this on Sunday, September 19th, and the full moon is tomorrow. And there'll be an October update coming in just a week and a half. So this will carry us over from then until now. And again, please feel free to share this. This will be made public this month, just as a service, as I do every several months. And a special thank you, of course, to the patrons who support this and make this possible. And thank you all. And we have some goodies in store for you guys too. There's a cosmic interview, cosmic interview for those of you at the $10 a month range, and that'll be published in the next couple of days. That's been recorded. And with no further ado, let me jump into the chart and where we are today. Okay. So as per usual, we are looking at a whole sign house chart with Aries rising. This means that wherever you are on the planets are in their correct positions. At noon, these charts are all for noon Pacific Daylight Time. You need to adjust to your time zone accordingly. But wherever you are on the planet on October 1st, the moon will be at 9 degrees of Leo. So let's start off and back this up to today. And here we are on the 19th, and we have the moon at noon at 12 degrees, 32 minutes of Pisces. And of course, we're coming into a full moon tomorrow, which is what we're going to look at here in just a moment. But let me just say a word first about Mercury, since Mercury is already slowing down. Mercury is at 22 degrees, almost 23 degrees, 22 degrees and 49 minutes of Libra. And if we move this ahead a day at a time until the 26th, when Mercury turns retrograde, let's just click this ahead to the 26th, one day at a time. There's the 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th. And you can see here that is stationary, turning retrograde at 25.5 degrees. We come back to today, the 19th. And so Mercury barely moves 3 degrees in nearly a week. So actually, yeah, in a full week. So that's slow because Mercury had been moving up to nearly 2 degrees a day. And so Mercury is already slowing down. And of course, we know as planets begin to move slower, they gain more momentum, they gain more power. And so we'll keep our eye on Mercury between now and the end of the month, because by the end of the month, let's run this real quickly to the end of the month. Mercury is still at 24 degrees of Libra. So between the middle of September and the beginning of October, that Mercury barely moves a total of just a couple, 2 to 3 degrees. And so here we are back on the 19th, and we'll just keep our eye on Mercury. Also, just want to make one other observation, that we are at the tail end of a period of time where all the outer planets are retrograde. We can see here, looking at this chart, that we have Jupiter at 23 degrees 38 minutes of Aquarius retrograde. We have Saturn at 7.25 degrees of Aquarius retrograde. We have Uranus at 14, nearly 14.5 degrees of Taurus retrograde. We have Chiron at 11.25 degrees of Aries retrograde. We have Neptune at 21 and 38 degrees of Pisces retrograde. And we have Pluto at 24 and almost 24.5 degrees of Capricorn and retrograde. So this is quite extraordinary. Of course, Mercury coming into the retrograde here will add its own 2 cents, or maybe even 3 or 5 cents to the mix. But I just want to mention that beginning in October, we're going to see the falling of these planets going from retrograde back to direct, with Pluto turning direct on October 6th, Saturn turning direct on the 10th, Jupiter turning direct on the 17th, and then Mercury turning direct on October 18th. So we have pretty much the planets falling one at a time, falling, actually unfalling. I don't know which way is up. When there is no up, there's only in and out. But all the planets that are moving retrograde, one by one, begin to turn back around and begin to push direct. And what that means is that we still may feel like we're in a bit of a whirlpool or an eddy, kind of caught in a tide, and we're not quite getting to where we think we need to be going. And we can say that on an individual and personal level, or we can look at a global collective level. It seems like we've always been there, or we've been there for at least several years now. But we may begin to see some of these pieces begin to fall away and begin to move forward again, starting in October. And then especially, of course, by the 18th, when Mercury being turning direct and then picking up speed. So let's come back to where we are right now. We've had Mars just enter Libra. We have the Sun toward the end of Virgo, and the Sun actually moves into Libra. This is the equinox, the spring equinox in the southern hemisphere, and the autumnal equinox here up in the northern lands, and that occurs on September 22nd. Actually midday in Seattle. It actually occurs at noon. But between now and then, we have an interesting dance, as in effect, we've become a little bit wetter now that the moon has moved into Pisces. And we have today on the 19th, interestingly enough, we have the moon forming trines with Venus and Uranus. Venus still coming into an opposition with Uranus, and that Venus opposition Uranus is exact on the 23rd. We'll get there in just a moment, but you can see here that Venus is already opposing Uranus within 4 degrees, Venus at 10 degrees of Scorpio and Uranus at 14. And into that today, we have the moon making a trine first with Venus, and that was this morning, and then a sextile with Uranus, and that is this afternoon. Again, this is Sunday that I'm recording this on September 19th. Now, as we move ahead tomorrow, I'm going to just jump this ahead one day. And we are now looking for a chart. We are looking at the chart of noon. All charts, unless specified, will be noon for the day that we're talking about. And I'll refer to these charts as today. So if we're looking at this chart and I say something about today, it actually now means September 20th, because that's the day's chart that we're looking at. But we can see here that the moon actually in the moon in Pisces joins up with Neptune, and that moon conjoins Neptune very early this morning, the morning of Monday, September 20th, actually at 4:39 a.m. Pacific time. But I want to jump this chart ahead to 4:54 p.m. Here we are looking at a chart for the full moon at 4:58 p.m. We see one of the peculiarities that comes out even when we round things to the nearest minute, which seems like that should be close enough. But we have the full moon actually at 4:54 p.m. and the sun is at 28 degrees of Virgo and 14 minutes. And the moon shows here at 28 degrees Pisces and 13 minutes. But it's actually would round up closer to 14 minutes. And so this, because it's not rounding up any further than this, it just shows it cut off. But this is the actual time for the full moon itself. And this is like entering water world. There's a couple of things very interesting about this full moon. Some of them are showing, that we'll talk about. And one of the things that I want to talk about is not showing, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But this full moon has a lot of power to it, and all the power doesn't show. First of all, we do have a moon at the very end of the sign, the full moon at the very end of the sign. So it doesn't hold this position very long. The moon actually moves into Aries at 8:12 p.m. today. So we only have maybe a 4-hour period, less than that, about a 3-hour period of that moon being actually full in Pisces before it switches over to Aries. But it brings a whole lot of wetness, a whole lot of feeling, a whole lot of emotion as it does. But the emotion of Pisces is a very particular type of emotion. You know, the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces have something in common, and that is that they're all of the feeling realm, of the emotional realm. But Pisces is like a boundless feeling. Pisces is not personal. Pisces is, it's almost like the agape love of spirit or of God. And Pisces, in fact, is that emotional connection we can make, but without necessarily names. It's not personal. It's not a, this is how I feel about you. It's more like I'm picking this energy up off the airwaves, and this is the feeling that's out there, and this is what I'm feeling. This is how I'm connecting to the wider circuit. Pisces is arguably it's the psychic, or it's a psychic sign, because we're very hypersensitive. We're very attuned to those subtle vibrations. But again, it's not about the personal energy. It's not about the Cancerian energy of nurturing a family member, or that unconditional love for family, or the Scorpio love, which may be more conditional, but it's also more intense, more passionate, and transformative. And it's that whole energy of wanting to hold the position, a fixed love, if you will, or fixed feelings. Whereas the Pisces full moon is oceanic. That's the word I was looking for. And we have here the dilemma, the paradox of the moon being so boundless and open and sensitive and feeling and compassionate. And the sun, on the other hand, is giving off light that's very narrowed. It's that Virgoan energy, that the beams are very specific and very, very detailed. Now, the sun is conjoined with Mars. It's a waning conjunction. Mars is moving ahead and away from the sun now, but it's still, it's a conjunction. 4 degrees orb. That's certainly enough to be considered a conjunction, a little bit over 4 degrees. But Mars is in a separate sign, and Mars here is almost acting like a harbinger. Mars is acting like a here's what's going to be happening, because the sun, just as the moon will be moving into Aries, which is Mars's sign, the sun will be moving into Libra, and the energies will shift. But we have here this high level of pre-delivery pregnancy. We're about as ripe as we can get, and yet it's still too soon to make our move, or to contract and go into the birth process. And yet this full moon has an incredible amount of power, not only because it's so late in the sign and something's got to shift with it, because it's rather unstable here, because as the energy shifts, Mars already into the next sign, but the sun into Libra, and then the moon into Aries, the energy really shifts. But there's another piece of this that's interesting, and that has to do with the planet Uranus, which is at a rather uncomfortable point in this whole process. Uranus is a half a square to the moon, or we should say, since the moon is moving faster, we would say the moon is a half square to Uranus, I think is more correctly the way to say it. And the sun is a square and a half to Uranus from the other side. So Uranus here is not very comfortable, because it's basically it's in a state of stress, in tension, in disequilibrium, both with the full moon and with the sun that's feeding the moon. And yet we look at that Uranus, and opposite we have Venus coming into an opposition. So if we follow, if we follow around just the four planets, the sun, Venus, the moon, and Uranus, we can see here, with all the other aspect lines taken out, that we have, in effect, what at first glance might look like a mystic rectangle, where you have a trine, sextile, except here we have a trine that's 120 degrees, that's been stretched into a square and a half, 145 degrees, and then a sextile, which has been narrowed to 45 degrees. So we basically have two sets of oppositions: the full moon opposite the sun, obviously, and Venus opposite Uranus. But together they form a square and a half square, a square and a half, which is a sesqui-square, and another half square, which is a semi-square. And so we can see here that the energy of what's exciting, what's out of the box, what's unconventional, our attraction in relationship to being stimulated in ways that we're not normally, the excitement of movement, the excitement of something new, of something unstable happening, that is feeding this full moon. And it's not comfortable, because these two sets of oppositions are at an uncomfortable relationship. They're in an uncomfortable relationship with one another, because they're related by half squares and square and a halves. And in a way, this is showing a whole lot of stress and tension that's hidden in this full moon, that is not obvious at first glance when we go back to showing all the aspects. One of the saving graces that we do have in this particular full moon is an aspect that's not to the moon itself, but remember Mercury, which has slowed down quite a bit. Mercury is just coming into a square with Pluto, but it's also making a trine with Jupiter. And you can see here that Mercury making two strong aspects is really making a statement unto itself. The fact that it's trining Jupiter is giving us hope. It's giving us the potential of going somewhere with all of this. Mercury trine Jupiter, it can be very optimistic, which can be very useful. But on the other hand, we have to be careful of the fact that with a Mercury trine Jupiter, we can get so optimistic that we gloss over what the reality is, and we may focus on a false sense of blind optimism, if you will. But the other piece here is that Mercury, which is trine Jupiter today on the 20th, actually is square Pluto on Wednesday early morning. So we're coming into that pretty closely. And as such, we're also very aware of what is not being shown on the surface. That Mercury square Pluto can be a power struggle. It can be stuff coming up that's from the unconscious, whether it's ours or whether it's someone else's that's coming up at us, whether we're learning things that we didn't know, that we didn't want to know, but now we have to know, or whether we're doing our best to keep something hidden and yet that comes out. All of these are possibilities, but that Mercury is a very significant player in this full moon. Another significant player in the full moon is Venus, which is making an exact quincunx to Chiron. That's earlier this morning. It's exact at 9:12 a.m., but that's a slow enough moving aspect that that's with us all day. And this, of course, represents the irritation, that's the quincunx, that we might have based upon what we know we need to learn, and what feels good. Chiron being the what we need to learn, and Aries, the lesson's going to come at us strong, whether we want to know it or not. That Venus in Scorpio would like to only focus on what it wants to focus on. Venus in Scorpio is not afraid of going deep, but it wants to do it on its own terms. Now, this is all a bit about the full moon itself, but there's one other piece here that is not obvious unless we shift powers of the telescope and take a quick look at the septiles. Okay, we are now looking at the identical chart, but instead of seeing all the regular aspects, we're looking only at the aspects that are septiles. And the septiles here, remember, are 1/7, 2/7, and 3/7 of a circle. And we have a very interesting configuration with the full moon being 1 point on a 7-pointed star. Now, remember, when we get to the odd aspects like trines, that's a third of a circle, 1/3, third harmonic. Quintiles, that's 5 or 1/5 of a circle. Septiles, that's 1/7 of a circle. When we get to these odd numbers, the oppositions fall through the cracks. So here we can see that the moon is tied up in this pattern that is 1/7 of a circle to Saturn and 3/7 of a circle to Mercury. What this means is that there is a 7-pointed star with the moon and Saturn, and then a missing point up here somewhere in Sagittarius, and then Mercury, and then 1, 2, 3 more missing points down here. But the sun is not part of this. This is just a lunar energy. And that lunar energy, the moon, tied into a strong septile pattern. Septiles are otherworldly. They're mysterious. They're alien. They're other dimensional. They're ghosts and goblins and spirit guides and things that are invisible, that are too complicated to fit into this world. Dane Rudhyar called them the aspect of fate, because fate is complicated and it doesn't fit in. Jung noted that things seem to be fated when they're not integrated into the conscious mind. When things are unconscious, we project them in their fate. So the sevens are all about that. And what this leads me to believe is that around this full moon, there's some very deep hidden stuff going on that doesn't meet the eye, that can be very complicated. But if we take the time, become quiet, go inward, we can touch some very, very powerful, magical places that don't necessarily make it to the surface because the noise kind of just is overwhelming. I mean, there are other septiles here. There's a Venus-Jupiter septile and a Neptune-Uranus septile. It's a strong septile chart, but the thing from the full moon standpoint is that the moon is part of that septile circuit, which makes that moon in Pisces doubly, triply complicated. Now, to take this one quick step further, let's just take a really quick look at the quintiles. When we look at the quintiles, the lines aren't as thick, which means that the aspects aren't quite as tight. But when we look at the sun, and the sun Mars in particular, to Jupiter, it turns out that the actual biquintile point between the sun between Jupiter and the sun and Jupiter and Mars. The actual point is right in the middle between the sun and Mars, which makes that biquintile even more important. Now, biquintiles, unlike septiles, are also magical. They're also metaphysical, but they're creative. They manifest into the three-dimensional world as beauty, whether it's the five-pointed, rounded-edged, spiraling inward rose, whether it's magic music of Beethoven or things of beauty, spiritual leaders, Ram Dass, Sri Aurobindo. These energies are also very powerful, but they're creative and easier, less complicated than septiles. And what I find of interest here is that the sun is connected by these magical quintiles, and the moon is connected by the mystical septiles. And so we have this delicious dance here of the relationship between the full moon to the sun, which is normally just a straight line, and they're a tug of war pulling in opposite directions. But in this case, because quintiles and septiles don't pick up on oppositions because they're odd numbers, the fact is that the moon is much more integrated into other times, other places, other worlds, other dimensions. It's supernatural. It's not here. It's not now. And on top of that, it's in Pisces. This is a very powerful, again, oceanic full moon that if we can get out of the illusion of the separateness of the Virgo sun, that still can be creative if it's willing to grow, meaning going to Jupiter in Aquarius, but it has to step out of its own place. And it doesn't have much time to do that. Why do I say that? Because this is September 20th. Let's go back to noon, since that's what we want to be working with now. Okay, so let's take this one day forward and go back to our original aspects. And we're now at noon on the 21st. And we can see that the line connecting the sun to Uranus, that sesqui-square is even closer. That's now perfected. Although the sun is at 29 degrees of Virgo, it wants so badly to be in Libra now. The moon has moved into Aries. But now we also have Mercury partile exactly perfected square to Pluto. That's this morning at 6 a.m., at 6:11 a.m. And most importantly, we have the sun moving into Libra. It's actually at 12:20 p.m., which is why the sun here shows at the last degree of Virgo. And that actually won't be till tomorrow. Let's move this ahead one more day. There we go. And now we have Mercury perfecting its square to Pluto. Communication becomes more intense. We have the sun now at 29 degrees, 59 minutes. It moves into Libra just about 20 minutes later, starting the new season, the season of autumn here in the Northern Hemisphere. We can also see that Venus is coming in closer now to its opposition to Uranus. This is Wednesday, but we also have the moon on Wednesday being kind of annoying, even though the moon, even though it's past the full moon, the moon as it moves through Aries will square Pluto and oppose Mercury while Mercury is squaring Pluto. So this dynamic becomes incredibly important. And this would be on Wednesday, the 22nd, and that moon really, I think it makes us feel like, I don't want to say we're not at home, but it shows what's awkward. It brings out some deep stuff that if we're willing to process it, again, it can be very powerful. And remember that Mercury is still, even though it's waning and even though it's separating, the moon is still trine to Jupiter, which means that the moon, Mercury is still trine to Jupiter, which means that the moon is still going to be picking up on that sextile to Jupiter. So it's not all tough. There's some real sweetness here, but there's also some real strong needs to confront the reality of what it is. And then we come in on Thursday to the Venus's opposition to Uranus. And the moon also moves into Taurus early in the morning, actually at 5:37 a.m. on Thursday. And that combination of those two energies is very strong. Why? Because when the moon moves into Taurus, it looks for Venus, because Venus is the ruler of Taurus. Venus here in Scorpio is in its fall, meaning, no, it's in its detriment, because it's opposite the sign of its domicile. And it's also opposing Uranus. And so the oddity here is that the moon in Taurus is exalted. It loves being in Taurus because it feels safe and secure, even though emotions always change. So the moon likes being in Taurus, and it's approaching Uranus. The moon actually joins up with Uranus on Friday morning. That would be tomorrow, being that this is the chart for Thursday, September 23rd. But that moon joins up with Uranus tomorrow, and we also have today on the 23rd Venus opposing Uranus, which means that the moon will not only join up with Uranus tomorrow, but it will also oppose the moon. Let's move that ahead to tomorrow, and you can see now we're on Friday the 24th, and we're basically moving this whole week toward this level of excitement, of something new, something different. The moon lining up with Uranus and Taurus, it's like I feel safe, and yet if I don't do something new and different, I'm going to be bored. Let's push the envelope and let's take a risk. There's a whole sense of this energy being about feeling safe enough to push the boundary a little bit. And at the same time, we have another thing coming in that will be with us through the weekend, and that is the fact that Mars is trining Saturn. Normally, we think of Mars and Saturn as the two bad guys. They're the classical, the Hellenistic malefics. But malefics here doesn't necessarily mean they are bad. It just means that they're tough to manage. It means that they're difficult to master because they have a mind of their own. I mean, granted, the benefics, Venus and Jupiter, have a mind of their own too, but their mind just seems to be more conducive, more pleasure-oriented, easier to integrate. And yet, when the two malefics, Mars and Saturn, when they connect up by trine, when they harmonize, man, this is a time when we can get things done. This is very, very powerful for organization, for accomplishment, for setting goals, and putting complex pieces of a long-term goal into place. Make a plan, but don't just think about it in sometime in the future. Make a plan and begin to step into it, because this Mars trining Saturn is one that if we don't pay any attention to it, it'll just feel like things are going okay for a day or two. But as we move toward the end of the week, even with the craziness and the excitement of the energy of Venus opposing Uranus on Thursday, and then Friday, which was what we're looking at here, the 24th, the high frequency energy of Uranus kind of taking the moon and shattering its normal simplicity and stability while in Taurus. And of course, we also have the moon squaring Saturn, because even though that Saturn-Uranus square is kind of at its widest right now, before it starts to come back together next month as as Uranus and Saturn both continue to turn direct. I think Saturn turns direct and Uranus doesn't turn direct yet. So when Saturn turns direct in October, it begins to catch back up to that square. Right now it's at 7, Saturn's at 7 degrees. And so the moon actually makes that square to Saturn on Thursday evening, and then it joins up with Uranus and opposes Venus. It's a really active couple of days. By the time we get to, we're still looking at the 24th on Friday. By the time we get to Saturday, we can see that Mars is trining Saturn. Again, organize, stabilize, put into motion things, manage projects, and actually do the work on it. But what's cool here is at the same time, we have the moon coming into a series of trines as it moves through late Earth, it'll pick up a trine. It'll pick up on a trine to Pluto, but then by the 26th, that would be Sunday, that moon will pick up on a trine not only to the sun and Mars in Libra, but to Saturn in Aquarius. And again, we're extending that Mars trine Saturn, even though technically it's over. It was exact on Saturday, the 25th. The fact of the matter is that once the moon moves into Gemini late afternoon on the 25th, by the 26th, which is what we're looking at here, we're getting that grand air trine. And again, plan, but don't just leave it in your head. Do something with it. Put things into motion. Sunday is an incredibly powerful and productive day. And on top of that, Mercury is stationary. This is the 26th, the day that Mercury begins its retrograde phase. Let's get over the fact that so many people have so much fear about Mercury retrograde and things going wrong. And yes, I have my Mercury retrograde stories too. I can tell some pretty crazy stories about the day that Mercury turns retrograde. That may be the strongest day in the whole, pack, is the actual days that a planet is stationed. So let's take a look at Mercury, and let's actually back this up a few days. And we can see here that Mercury moved into 24 degrees of Libra back on the 21st. Back on the 21st, that was Tuesday. On the 23rd, it's at 24 degrees of Libra. On the 24th, it's at 25 degrees, 24, then 25 degrees of Libra. On the 25th, it's at 25 degrees of Libra. On the 26th, it's at 25 degrees of Libra, now retrograde. On the 27th, it's at 25 degrees Libra. On the 28th, it's at 25 degrees Libra. On the 29th, it's still at 25 degrees of Libra. My point here is that we think of Mercury turning retrograde and then it begins going backward. Well, it turns retrograde and it pretty much holds its position for several days. I mean, this is 3 days after the actual retrograde turn, and it's still within a half a degree of where it was when it's stationed. And it's not until the 30th, until October 1st, when it actually really starts moving backward 24 degrees, then 23, and so on. So let's bring this back to the 26th, on the day that Mercury is stationed. That 25 degrees of Libra is the important piece here. And of course, what this means is that Mercury, even though it technically made its trine with Jupiter back on Monday, the 20th, the day of the full moon, that it really doesn't ever get far away from it. It turns retrograde. It's still only 2 degrees out of orb, 2 degrees orb from trining Jupiter. Mercury trining Jupiter, and it holds that position long enough that this gives us a tremendous ability to use this retrograde Mercury, the stationary retrograde Mercury, by taking our time and expanding. That would be Jupiter. Our thoughts, that would be Mercury, and expanding them and making ideas bigger. But rather than doing it just overnight, blowing a balloon up and not knowing how big it is before it pops, we can blow it up slowly, because we have time to work with that energy, work with it again. And in fact, when Mercury does finally retrograde and pull back off, it will be toward the end of October, actually really into November, when Mercury moving direct will make that trine to Jupiter for the last time, as it's moving direct after the retrograde. And so we have some real time here to make some really big, grand plans, and yet keep our feet on the ground at the same time. Now, remember, on the 26th, we're also getting the play of this grand air trine, but that grand air trine involves Saturn and Mars, which helps us ground the energy if we actually do something with it. Let's move on to the 27th. And we, of course, still have the moon in Gemini. And on the 27th, we have Mars making its exact square and a half to Jupiter. And it's interesting here because Mars had been making a trine to Saturn. This is about the balance between going forward, Mars, and not going too far forward too fast, Saturn. This is between the trine between Mars and Saturn is being able to work the gas, the accelerator and the brake evenly. But when Mars hits that sesqui-square to Jupiter, exactly, we can easily overdo things. We have to pay attention. It can be a trap. It can be a trick. It's a temptation, but we don't have to go there. But it does open things up a little bit, and it does let us work that gas a little bit harder, but we have to be careful we're not pushing too hard, too fast. And that would be on September 27th. And that same day, the moon actually makes its trine to Jupiter, the moon from Gemini. And so we're certainly getting some optimism and some movement. And the temptation, I think, on Monday is to move a little bit too fast. On Tuesday, we get to cool our heels a little bit. Why? Well, the moon moves into Cancer on Tuesday, the 28th. And it also forms a square with the sun. We can kind of see this as a little bit of a T-square, because Mars is coming into an opposition with Chiron, and the moon therefore will square the sun, then square Mars, then square Chiron. And this can be a little bit of a rough patch. The moon in Cancer, maybe it feels like we want to be home, or that maybe there is some connection with home, but there's also a connection with some difficulty having either to learn some lessons, or maybe someone in our home environment, someone we love, isn't feeling great or isn't feeling well. But remember, Chiron is not just about being sick or being wounded. Chiron is also about learning. And with that Mars opposition Chiron, it can feel like we're bumping into a wall, but it also is, if we can learn it, that's how we overcome it. That's how we deal with the energy as we move through it and we move past it. That is on the 28th. By the 29th, and of course, the moon now being in Cancer, the moon is in her home sign, in its own sign. But by the 29th, we now have the moon in Cancer, beginning to make its squares to the cardinal planets. The moon squares, we did the square to the sun and Mars already. Sorry, that was on the 29th. Let's back this. Okay, now we're on the 29th here, on Wednesday, and we have the moon making its square to Mars early in the morning, and then picking up on its square to Chiron. I lumped that into yesterday because it was all moving toward yesterday evening, meaning Tuesday night, but that actually occurs early Wednesday morning, Pacific time. The other thing here, though, that is important is that we have two very profound and powerful trines. We have the sun moving into a trine with Saturn. Remember, this is where Mars was. Mars trined Saturn just 4 days ago. Mars trined Saturn on Saturday, the 25th. And now on Wednesday, the 29th, the sun trines Saturn. This is actually good news. This gives us the ability to work with Saturn. This gives us the ability to actually make structure, to put things in place and to make them work with us or for us. This is very, very powerful. It's very stabilizing. It can be karmic, but remember, karma isn't something that you're paying today for something that you did or didn't do in the past. Karma is also what you do today that builds the potential for what you get tomorrow. So just sometimes we pass karma off as something that's already happened. We create new karma every day. And while Mars and then the sun on Wednesday, the 29th, when they trine Saturn, this is tremendous good karma building if we do the work, if we're willing to put in the work. Remember, Saturn is the taskmaster. The other trine that's occurring is that Venus is forming a trine with Neptune. And this is kind of intriguing because it's setting up a grand trine that the moon will move through tomorrow on September 30th. You can see already it's picking up on it by midday of the 29th. that the moon is forming a trine with Venus on one side and Neptune on the other, but it's off 7 degrees roughly, and that's 14 hours of time. Meanwhile, the Venus trine Neptune is exact today on Wednesday, the 29th. What does this mean? Well, Venus and Neptune are like, they're the lower and higher octave of love. Venus is the I love you. Neptune is love. Neptune is the kind of like beautiful blue cloud sky, orange sunshine, flowers, and just the capital LOVE. It's the Beatles. All you need is love. That's Neptune. Neptune is not, we're back to Pisces, that full moon in Pisces where we started. It's not personal. Neptune is at home. It's the modern planet associated with Pisces, and Neptune at home in Pisces certainly gives us that sense of a personal love, meaning it's the love of love, it's the love of humanity, it's the love of nature, it's the love of everyone. And Venus is the I love you planet. And so when Venus in Scorpio, which is perhaps the most personalized, the most passionate, maybe even the most possessive, Scorpio, Cancer can be possessive also, of course. But with Scorpio, that Venus in Scorpio is playing for keeps. It's not messing around. And yet it's working in perfect harmonious balance, not only with Neptune, giving us a real equilibrium between the personal love and the cosmic love, but into that on the 29th and then on the 30th, it's late enough in the day that it looks like that moon has already passed through it. Sure, here at noon, at noon on the 29th, it's at 14 degrees. And then if we took it 12 hours, roughly, it would be 21. But by afterwards, let's just back this up 12 hours just for the fun of it so we can see this, because it's too cool not to see. So there is the, this is now instead of at noon, this is at midnight. Then the night of the 29th, the first moment of Thursday, the 30th, the last day of the month. But what a send off of beauty on the last day of the month. That moon, even a couple of hours later, will be exactly partile. Well, yeah, partile trine Neptune, and then an hour or two later, partile trine Venus. And so it really re-emphasizes that energy, holds it an extra day. What a sweet, sweet, sweet energy. I really like this energy. However, we just should also keep in mind, astrologically, there's always good news and bad news. It's good news and bad news. There's always two sides of any equation that are presented. And we also have the moon moving to oppose Pluto and square Mercury. Remember that Mercury is holding its position, squaring Pluto. It's stationary. Even though it's retrograde, it's barely moving. And so this deep, intense, powerful, passionate, jealous communication that has something to do with secrets and people doing shit against you and you doing things, schemes against other people. And Mercury square Pluto isn't always nice. It's the mischievous trickster energy, and because it's retrograde. And yet this is also stuff that we can dig into. And when the moon comes through there in the early morning hours, early morning, mid-morning hours of Thursday, September 30th, we're not only getting that grand trine energy, but that quickly shifts to, oh, there's something else going on. And we need to deal with that something else. And interestingly enough, it can be too much. Why can it be too much? Well, because Jupiter comes into play as Venus makes a square to Jupiter at the same time that the sun is making a square and a half to Jupiter. So you can see here, we got this little triangle here of Venus, Jupiter, and the sun. And we can see here really clearly now how this energy of this asymmetrical triangle, but a triangle based upon the eighth harmonic. Why the eighth harmonic? It's a square and a half a square. Half a square is a square is a quarter, a half a square is an eighth, and 3/8 is a square and a half. And so we have this intense energy between Venus, Jupiter, and the sun in Libra. And that sun in Libra is also with Mars. It's still just 2.5 degrees apart. So we're getting that sun in Libra, not as a regular, easygoing, floating, gee, I don't know what to do kind of Libra energy. Here, this Libra energy has direction. And remember, Libra isn't to be trifled with when it knows what it's doing, because it's not only the grand diplomat, it's the negotiator, it's the tactician who can play the, it's the chess player or the Go player who can strategize and figure out, and it looks like they're doing one thing, but they might be doing something very differently. And yet here's Venus and Jupiter, which are both about overindulgence and pleasure. Remember earlier, I said the benefics are easier to handle. Well, here they're in square. So, if you're going to have a conflict, you might as well have a conflict between two planets trying to do sweet or nice things, but too much of a good thing is not a good thing. Ask anyone who's ever had any battle with any sort of growth or any sort of cancer. I don't mean the astrological cancer. I mean Jupiter unrestrained, meaning growth without a structure of Saturn. And so you have Venus square Jupiter, and it can be certainly overindulgence of love, of sex, of sweets, of liquor, of anything. And because the sun is at a square and a half square, it's feeding into that energy. So this can be a complicated energy, but it's something we can manage by paying attention to excess. And I think of the William Blake line from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. He wrote, "The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom." Well, sometimes it does. But the road of excess also leads to worse things. So we just need to be aware of excess on this day. So that takes us to the end of the month. Actually, by the last hours of September 30th, we can see that that moon is moving towards the end of Cancer. Let's actually play this and just move this 1 hour at a time, and we watch that moon and we watch it go into Leo at about 6 p.m. It's actually 5:53 p.m. Pacific time. And so we begin October with the moon having just moved into Leo, and it's a slightly different energy, and especially with the fact that in October we have all these planets. We have 4 planets turning direct. I think September was a lot tougher for the first half of the month than the second half of the month, but it's certainly not done. We got some serious stuff to do, but a lot of it now has to do with how we incorporate it into our own being, how we integrate it, how we feel about things, how we take the energy of this full moon and we work with that energy until actually we're going to come around to a new moon in Libra. And that new moon in Libra will be on October 5th or 6th, depending upon where in the planet you are. So that's the remaining week and a half of the month, and with a special focus on the full moon in Pisces. But I think it's really important to understand that we've been through this outward manifestation process. And as we come into the autumn, in a way, from Aries to Libra, the energy energetically moves outward in the Northern Hemisphere, astrologically all over the earth, but climate-wise in the Northern Hemisphere. Spring is the first moment of beginning of growth. And by the time we get to Libra, the energy has gone outward. In Virgo, it slows, but it's still going outward. And that's when we harvest. But by the time we get to Libra, that's the balance point. And at that point, the energy begins pulling in, but it's stationary. It's neither going out nor coming in. And that's when, in some places, the leaves are in perfect balance, and it's that Libran, Venusian, beautiful late summer, Indian summer, sometimes it's called in some places. But it's just everything is perfect. And then, of course, as the energy continues to pull in, by the time, excuse me, by the time the sun moves into Scorpio, the energy starts moving in really fast, and the leaves then dry up. They fall off the trees. There's real death, so to speak. But that's the beginning of the magic that pulls the energy inward until by next Aries, by next spring, the energy begins pushing outward again. So there we have it. Thank you all. Again, thank you especially to my patrons. For those of you who are watching this and don't know what Patreon is, check out patreon.com/Rick Levine, and you can see a whole host of videos that I have offered to my Patreon supporters, and everyone else can see my daily work, which is also supported by all of you Patreoners. Thank you very much. But there's a daily feed on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram is Rick Levine Astrologer, and on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Rick Levine Astrologer. And it's a daily planet pulse with a kind of little bit of a blog. It's not quite a horoscope, but it's an astrological contemplation for every day of the year. Thank you very much. I'm Rick Levine, and we'll see you for the October forecast soon enough.